Hey, I'm Keoki, the CEO at Minikai. On this podcast, you'll hear from industry experts to explore the opportunities, risks, and practical applications at the intersection of AI, disability, and aged care. The aim is to promote a responsible and transparent approach to adoption of AI in a space where safety and trust are really important. Let's jump in. Craig.
Keoki.
Good to see you.
And you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Welcome.
As I understand it, I've done a bit of research. You haven't actually always been in aged care. So I know before you actually have a financial services background.
That's right.
For a time. So I'm always interested in understanding how people sort of found themselves in aged care. So can you tell me a bit about how you came to be in aged care and sort of what drew you to the sector in the first place?
Sure. So as you said, my background in the UK and when I moved to Australia was in financial services. Around the GFC, I was made redundant. And so I had to look for another job. And that job was in a different industry. It was actually in health. And so that was my first taste of health at SA Health. And I stayed there for a while. And then the opportunity came to become a CIO. And that opportunity was at TAFE SA. So I moved into education. Stayed there for a little while. And then in 2018, I was offered the opportunity to move to ACH Group and have been there ever since. The reason that I moved to ACH Group, and probably the reason I considered it, was my mum had just gone into aged care at the time. So I knew nothing about aged care. It wasn't even on my radar as something that I wanted to do or even thought I would be interested in. But the more you are involved in aged care, the more you start to ask questions and the more you see opportunity to improve. And so that was, if you like, the initial introduction to aged care. I looked at the challenges and I could see where ACH Group was as an organization at that time. And it was just on the cusp of some radical transformation. And that really appealed to me and still appeals to me.
Just to maybe familiarize listeners who don't know much about the organization, do you mind just telling us a little bit about ACH Group, who you care for, what are some of the services you provide, that kind of thing?
Sure. So we're a full service aged care provider. We've been delivering good lives to older people since 1952. We have about 14,000 customers and around 2,000 staff. In terms of the services and what does that mean? So we have residential aged care, which most people think about when they talk about aged care. They think about residential aged care homes. We have home care. So we will come out to people's homes and deliver services that they need. And then we also have retirement living. So we provide accommodation. On top of that, we've got some health and wellbeing services. So we have some gyms which are specially equipped with equipment that is tailored to older people.
And I guess being fully serviced, so being across retirement living, residential aged care, and home care, you would understand some of the different pathways that people have as options for them or, find themselves in. So what I'm curious about is, do you see, I guess, the preferences shifting in how people want to age? How does that how has that changed since you've joined ACH?
It has changed. In the 7 years I've been at ACH Group, it has changed. I think the biggest change that I've become aware of is probably the length of stay that people have in residential aged care. It's and it always sounds quite morbid when you talk about these things, but it is an end of life destination, is residential aged care. And I'm sure if you spoke to 1,000 people in the street and said, when do you want to enter a residential aged care facility? I'm sure the answer will be never. But the truth is that people will need residential aged care for a variety of reasons. And if they do, we need to make sure that it provides the dignity and care that they deserve. So I would say what I've noticed is that people don't pick residential aged care or move into residential aged care for the lifestyle. I think it's, we found that people are coming in with higher acuity and the length of stays tends to be shorter. That's probably been the biggest change, the acuity driving the service that they require. I think most people want to age in place, and I think the increase in home care packages is certainly helping that happen.
Do you see that higher end of complexity, or that higher complexity of care happening more in people's homes?
Yes is the short answer. And the reason for that is that more people want to stay at home, and we're becoming better at being able to support people in their homes. So now, through the use of technology and skills and awareness, we're able to deliver services to people in their homes, which at one time probably would only be available in residential aged care. So and that's improving all the time. So the better we get at delivering those services and making people safe in their homes, the longer they'll be able to stay there. And that's what everybody wants.
Yeah. And you've talked to me about this, and I think got me really thinking about it actually in some of the early conversations we've had about the different challenges in the sector. And you've got, challenges on different fronts, sort of externally with regulations, internally in terms of processes and workforce. What do you think are, I guess, from your point of view, the biggest challenges facing aged care in Australia now, and what feels most urgent to you?
There's a number of challenges, right? So the first one is the changing demographic. So if we recognize that the baby boomers are now starting to enter aged care, we know there was some research done, I think it was about 2018, that that basically estimated the number of people requiring aged care services would grow 300% by 2028.
Yeah. Wow.
So the more people that need the services means you need more people to deliver the services. And so the second challenge is workforce, because at the same time, by 2030, it's estimated there will be 100,000 shortage of workers in aged care to meet the demand. So if you've got a growing demand and reducing supply, that's a problem. And the only way we're going to bridge that problem, I think, is through technology. So that's also the opportunity, and that's the thing that inspires me to continue to look at, well, how do we solve that problem? On top of that, there's regulation, and so we've got to the point where we're having to, for all the right reasons, to make sure we're giving the best levels of care. But in order to do that, we often have to document things. And if you're documenting things and doing more admin in order to justify the levels of care that are being delivered, it means you're not spending time with the person who needs the care. So if you take anything away from the point of care, to me, that's not a good thing. And so again, one of the challenges that I have is, well, how do I do all of that admin and turn all those admin minutes into care minutes? So if we could automate, and I know we've talked about all of that, but if we could automate a lot of that note taking and that administration, which doesn't offer any value to the care that's being delivered, it's all for administrative purposes. If we can automate that, that means that time taken could now be spent maybe helping another individual.
I guess technology and digital transformation plays a big role in helping to turn admin minutes into care minutes. And digital transformation and transformation in general gets talked about a lot. But I want to kind of explore what that looks like practically in the context of aged care. So what does it actually take to make transformation happen in an aged care organization?
I think the first thing is to realize what's transformation, what's not transformation. So I think the word transformation is overused. When is an IT project just an IT project and not transformation? For me, transformation consists of a number of domains. So it's people, process, technology, and information. And true transformation is impacting on all of those domains, not just one. All of those are very difficult. If it was easy, anyone would do it, and we do it all the time. But of all of those domains, and this is something that some people are quite surprised when I say it, the most difficult is people.
What are you talking about?
Well, I love my analogies, and the analogy I have is that I could build a Ferrari, I could build the best car in the world, right, or whatever car you want, but I can't stop people driving it like a tractor.
Okay.
So it's up to the individuals about how they embrace the technology. It's up to the individuals about how they get the best out of the technology. The technology on its own will not solve the problem. The process on its own will not solve the problem. It has to be a combination of all those things. And the most difficult one, because you have very little control over it, is people.
Yeah, and I feel like the aged care is such a people-based sector. It's all about people. And I think the added level of complexity that aged care providers face is also the size and diversity of the workforce. What influence does that have on how you approach transformation and make it happen?
You've got to know your audience. So who are we doing the transformation for, and what is the impact of the transformation? And then how do we distill that information so that people aren't afraid? And if they do have questions, that you open the lines of communication so that they can ask, and they can be inquisitive, and they can find out. And if they think something's not going to work, then they have the opportunity to raise that. So I think a lot of it is communication. English as a second language is very common in care. I think our last workforce census, I think the largest non-English speaking group were Nepalese. And it always amazes me when I start looking at, Google Translate, that you can't select Nepalese as a language. So I think there's a few things that we can do to make it more accessible, to remove the barriers to adopting technology. And people use labels all the time, and so you'll hear labels like change resistant. And I don't believe in change resistance. I believe in change response. And you have no idea what people are going through in their personal lives. They could have just had the worst morning, right? The kids won't go to school or whatever. And then they get to work, and the first thing you say is, hey, how do you feel about this change, which is going to impact what you do? They're probably not going to be very receptive to it. But by the time they've had, that first cup of coffee, they've settled down and got into doing what they do, you could ask them the same question again, and they're like, I'm a bit better about it now. So I think that's an important lesson, that that first interaction is not the end. It's an ongoing conversation. And the first response that you get isn't necessarily the true response. So I think that's something that we've learned as part of our change approach.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's, I've been reflecting on how actually one way to look at AI or think about AI is just as a communication technology, because it's just helping to transfer information from one person to another, where maybe that might be asynchronous. So, one thing that I've noticed is really important in delivering a good continuity of care is having a good continuity of context and information, where a lot of what needs to be transferred is just information from, one person to the next. You have, morning shift nurses handing over to afternoon shift nurses. And a lot of that being documented in progress notes and, other logs and documentation like that. I guess you've talked to me as well about how the documentation is a requirement, but is often something that takes people's time away from the care. And a lot of it is quite reactive. So your compliance generally is quite a reactive thing.
Yep.
Why do you think that is, and how I guess what would a more proactive way of doing that, what would that look like?
It's a good question. I think why that is, it's sometimes easier to create a paper form. I mean, how many times do you go to, you go to the dentist or doctors or anywhere new, and the first thing they give you is a paper form to fill in with all the details that, they should actually already have. So I think it's just easy to create paper because it's a way of um, compartmentalizing what's required in one hit and saying, let's just have the perfect form. Let's capture the information and then we've met our action. But if you were to spin that around to being person-centered, you would be saying, what do we already know about this person? And therefore, what is the gap? And how do we get the gap? And if that information already exists, we don't need to ask them because we already have the information. Otherwise, why do we bother capturing it in the first place? And the information we don't have, that's actually where the value is. So what could be a 30-minute filling in application forms could be a 30-second job because we only need this one piece of information. And I think that's the opportunity. And I know we've talked about how it's almost, I call it the digital twin, but it's what I think is required in aged care, because as people age, their ability to answer and remember information also starts to fade. But if we had the source of truth, which is their source of truth, and the consent from them to use that source of truth, then we wouldn't have to question them for admin and bureaucracy if it's just gathering information such as next of kin or who should we contact, because we have that information. And we could surface that when we need it.
And I think one of the other challenges with a form is that someone creates a form and then over time you realize, oh, we need to capture more in this form. And so the forms get bigger, or we need another form.
Yeah.
And you can never have too many forms. Yeah. We had a motto for a short while that everything is a form, because you look at the way a lot of information is managed in aged care and everything really is a form.
It is.
Yeah. But
it's not just aged care though.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are conditioned to fill in forms.
Yeah.
Just as we're conditioned to queue.
What is that? What's that about?
Well, you're getting deep now. So
let's go.
I think the transition is behavioral.
And
I think the technology has moved quicker than humans' ability to adapt their behavior. So I think that's probably there'll be someone better qualified to answer that question.
I agree with you there. And I think maybe it's been one of the privileges I've had of coming in with a fresh pair of eyes after AI has arrived. That's a privileged position to be in, because I've been able to come in and see lots of ways in which things are done and how they could be different given the technology.
Yep.
And I think from my perspective, what's happened is a lot of the requirements to capture things in a structured format, i.e. in a form, has been largely to do with responding to regulatory requirements.
Yep.
For example, the national quality indicators, residential aged care, that's a huge amount of effort that people go into manually. It's a manual collective effort to pull all of that information together. And it's highly unstructured and it's highly complex, and it's aiming to sort of force that information into a structure.
Yep.
And I often wonder how much of that data that's being reported is actually essential to giving the best quality care to the person.
I don't think it is. I better qualify that. I don't think it is in terms of the person.
Yeah.
I think it's quality of the service.
Yeah.
So it's about the multiple. It's about, what is the level of service that you are delivering to all individuals, and we're using that quality indicators to tell us what the standard is, as opposed to this is the level of care that Keoki received, as an example.
And I guess there are lots of things you can optimize for in an organization, most of which you'd typically expect from a business, like profitability or operational efficiency or competitive advantage, these sorts of things. What I think is really amazing about aged care is how focused people are on the quality of care and having a person-centered focus.
Yep.
This term is relatively common, but I kind of wanted to know from you what you think it actually means, and specifically how you can make technology person-centered, because we've talked about that in the past. If you implement for example, a new clinical management system or a new billing system, it can be very much centered around the billing logic, so how you charge for services. or you can make it person-centered. What does that actually mean? How do you do that?
To me, you can only be person-centered if you have that deeper level of knowing of your customers. So how do you get to that level? Because once you do, then you are able to start to tailor your services because you know who your customers are. What generally happens in more corporate environments and corporate industries is we go for the mass. And I think that's the big change, or the big difference I've noticed, is that we tend to tailor for the individual and scale the individual. We don't go for the mass and say, well, this is for 90% and let's not worry about the 10%.
Could you maybe share an example of where you've seen technology help with this, supporting the dignity or quality of life for older people, for your clients?
In terms of supporting dignity and giving people choice, when we actually perform the assessments and we go through the capturing that information, the questions are written in such a way that we're capturing what does the individual want, not this is the information I need to capture from you. We'll answer it in this order.
Yeah.
So we try and structure it in a way where it allows the individual to drive the conversation. There are other simple things where we can take feedback and really address the wishes of not just the people that we look after, but also their family, because you've got to remember we have a really complex landscape of stakeholders in aged care. It isn't always the person who is receiving the care who is the decision maker. Sometimes it's their son or their daughter who will pick which facility they want their loved one to stay in, or what services they want, or even have an opinion on the quality of those services that have been delivered. And so it's around how do we gather that information. And then a good example is on our visitor management system. What you will find is that it's facial recognition. So, and if you've been there before, it recognizes you and has all your details pre-populated. That's a really good example of cutting down the time taken to enter the facility to go see someone. And then when you leave and you sign out and it recognizes again who you are, it actually asks you questions around how would you rate your visit today? And if it's a lower rating, then the home manager will pick up the phone and contact that person to find out, what did we get wrong? What wasn't right?
Yeah.
All feedback is a gift. Strongly believe that.
Yeah.
So you don't want to miss the opportunity to say, what could we put right? And sometimes it's really simple things, but if you don't address the simple things, they can fester and suddenly become bigger things. And then the next time they visit, if there's something completely unrelated, it's a small thing on top of a small thing. And so that's a good example of how we're being very responsive. Not sure I answered the question about person-centered, but it certainly explains how we take feedback and how we act on feedback.
Well, I think it is a person-centered response, because you're sort of taking it back to the people who are receiving the care and their families. And I think that's something that this has probably been the thing that struck me the most about the sector, that I love about it, is how person-centered it really is. I mean, it's been a very common theme that when speaking with board members or executive teams, all the way, to the last sort of nurse, people are talking about individuals and individual stories. And I think that's really amazing. I think it's something that other industries honestly should sort of glean from.
I think that's what I was getting at in terms of the culture and the big difference. People actually believe it. So I know I've worked in environments where people know the tagline and they can tell you what the tagline is, but it's for marketing purposes. Whereas to truly believe it and to try and enact it, I think that's really special when you find those organizations. And I'm very fortunate to work in one of those.
Definitely. And do you think that, I guess, ACH Group being non-for-profit, do you think that gives you more scope to be able to have that focus?
From a frontline point of view, I think if you are a carer or a support worker, you are genuinely wanting to provide good care. Whether you work for a for-profit or a for-purpose organization, doesn't really matter. I think I think as you start to go through the layers of management and that's where the drivers come in. So obviously, if you're for profit and you have shareholders, then you will have different drivers and you will make different decisions based on those drivers. We're fortunate enough for purpose that we just need to make sure that we stick to our purpose. And so it's not about shareholder performance. It is about how we're delivering our purpose. And is this taking us nearer to that purpose or further away from it?
How do you evaluate that? How do you kind of instill that culture and maintain that culture?
If you're asking how does the executive team remain purpose-driven as opposed to concentrating on metrics, it's a very difficult job. You have to juggle both. But I think if you don't align with the purpose, you won't stay very long because nobody joins aged care for money, right? So if you're driven by money, driven by performance, driven by you, the outcome for you as an individual, you're probably not working in aged care is the honest answer to that. And certainly not a for-purpose organization. It's not a get-rich-quick type of place. So I think the people who work there are drawn to the purpose and are drawn to the outcome, and that's what drives them.
I love it. I agree with that. I'm going to start talking about AI now. It's on everyone's radar.
I'm an expert in AI, as you know.
I know this, full of great ideas. So AI is on everyone's radar.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what are the big opportunities or the opportunities for aged care providers when it comes to AI?
Turning those admin minutes into care minutes, what does that mean? Well, where are we spending time on admin? So if you're filling in a form and you already have that information, there is an opportunity for AI to do that. If you're gathering information and you don't gather all the information required at that time, it means that you're having to go back for a subsequent visit. You could have some validation and checking using AI to make sure you're gathering all the information or to prompt you. Because we always think about AI, right, as the human putting the prompt in, but maybe the AI can prompt the human. So reverse it around and say, you know what, you've missed this information.
Yeah.
If you think of aged care as someone's entitlement to services, then making sure that they get the maximum services that they're entitled to is also an opportunity for AI, because otherwise you have human decision makers, and where you have various people involved, you have variation in the outcome. So I think there's an opportunity to say, under this set of circumstances, this is the best care plan, as an example. But it has to be recommended. There has to be a human in the loop. So I don't advocate for AI taking over and replacing jobs. Absolutely not. But I do advocate for it to take over tasks where no value is added, and then the human making the decision at the end and saying, "Yeah, I like that. That's good. I would have gone with that," or "Actually, that's something I didn't consider."
Yeah. Yeah, and freeing up capacity for people to do their best work.
You can do more of that, right? So if the AI is actually doing all of that heavy lifting, then it means you can specialize and spend more time on the valuable tasks.
Going back to the biggest challenges, what role, how big of a role do you think AI has in helping to address those?
One of the benefits which we're seeing already is that we're reducing administration time over a week by 3 hours. So if you start to think about how many people, those 3 hours, all we need to do is have 2 people and we've basically nearly got a day's worth of additional effort. So that's how we're going to close the gap between demand and supply of workforce. We'll be able to make that workforce do more, care more, serve more.
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked about this in the past, where if you look at a lot of the, for example, clinical management systems that are more or less acting as a system of record. So it's essentially a clinical database where information is stored, and it does require quite a significant amount of effort to keep that up to date. And generally speaking, is quite difficult for people to use and access information. We've talked about the transition from a system of record to a system of work, or to use your term, a system of value, where a system is not just storing the information, but with AI is actually actively doing something with that of value.
That's right.
And alerting a person when they need to be informed or take action on something. What do you think that looks like, that transition?
The transition will be, as you say, replacing the system of record for a system of value. So that information will be captured, whether it's in a clinical system or whether it's in a CRM, it's captured. We already have the information. And if we're true to the principles, we capture the information once. The systems of value are the ones that are able to manipulate that information to deliver a positive outcome. So a human is only involved when it needs to make a decision or adds value.
Yeah.
How you might do that using AI. So agentic AI will take information from one step and take it to the next step if it meets certain criteria or if there's some decision making to make. But I think the real thing I'd like to explore is generative AI and how we can use that to creatively solve how do you jump to the next step in the process without having to design an exceptions process. Because aged care organizations love to design exceptions process. And then we have lots of checking to check that the exceptions process is either needed or working. And then we need someone to check their work to make sure they've done it properly. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. Is not around the 80%, it's around the 20%. And how do we attack that with AI to make sure that, again, we only add value and we only get involved where we need to get involved?
In thinking through this transition from a system of record to a system of value, where more of the work that people shouldn't really need to do is done by AI to free up people's capacity to focus on things that are more important, how do you actually see people's work changing? What the scope of their work and the scope of their jobs changing?
I think it will be more directive. So I think, I can envisage a day when somebody turns up and their to-do list is generated because it's looked at all of the things that need to take place and it's assessed which are the most urgent tasks and prioritize those. And so it becomes very prescriptive around, all of the admin that we try to put away and forget about and get around to it at some point. We actually know what we have to do in what order. So if I'm going to spend 1 hour on admin, as an example, I know what those tasks are, and most of it's been automated anyway. So that 1 hour would have normally taken me 8 hours, say. So I think that will change people's roles.
Yeah. And I guess with the opportunities like this, there's always going to be a level of risk involved as well. What risks do you think leaders should be paying most attention to when it comes to adopting AI or using AI as a solution to enable transformation?
I think the biggest risk is thinking that AI is 100% accurate. So that's the reason for having the human in the loop. It should only ever be a recommendation. And then, if we didn't need to train nurses to make those clinical decisions, then everything would be done by AI. The reason we train them is they can see when something doesn't quite hit the mark. So we always need to have those checks and balances. I think the risk is not having the checks and balances in place. The other risk is the quality of the data. So if you've got rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. Data quality is and data integrity are the first things that need to be bolted down and governed and really protected before you even consider starting to move into the AI journey of adopting it for value and for purpose. And also, I think the biggest risk, or not so much risk, but the biggest consideration is these are people's lives. So we need to make sure that we're making the right decision for the person, not for the process.
Do you think that there's a misconception about AI in aged care that you've heard about that you want to set straight?
I'm not sure about a misconception as such. I think there is a danger that people think the answer is AI. What's the question? It's a hammer, but not everything's a nail. So we tend to jump to the AI is the solution because it's easy. it's an easy solution to say, and everybody nods because we all want to sound as if we know what we're talking about. But I think if you actually start to pull it apart, there may be opportunities to not use AI, and there's good reason not to use AI. And I think we've got to challenge ourselves as to why would we use it, not just accept that we will. And I think that's the biggest risk, that we don't give it the scrutiny it needs because of the importance of the people we're looking after.
Yeah. What would be advice that you could give to those leaders in those organizations who actually haven't started that process or that journey yet, about how to get started, where to get started? What's the first step?
The first thing to do is to have some knowledge. So, there's a lot of online courses which will give a basic level of knowledge if you don't have that, some basic fundamentals around, large language models and data and how it all fits together, because we do tend to just talk AI and people think they know. I have conversations all the time with people who explain how AI works, and it's not how AI works. And I'm sure you have even more of those conversations. So I think getting a basic level of knowledge is good. I think to do some reflection, self-reflection. So what are all the tasks that you do that you don't add value? And then to reimagine those tasks in, if a computer could do that for you, what would it do? And that's likely to be some type of AI. And then looking at what other people are doing in the industries, right? So I think we said this before. In aged care, it's a very strange industry because we don't actually compete for customers. There are too many customers. We do compete for staff. And so I honestly believe that if I have the best technology and I can deliver a carer with the most time delivering care, they'll choose my organization over another aged care provider. But because we don't compete on customers, we can also share knowledge. And so it is a very collaborative industry. So I was in a meeting last week, in fact, with a number of aged care CIOs. And it's some of the initiatives that they are doing are honestly amazing.
Yeah.
Doing some really good work.
Yeah.
And the fact that they share that work just demonstrates that the competition is on workers, and it's not on each other, because we're all there to do a good job. And if we can stand on each other's shoulders to do an even better job, then I think that's what drives certainly the technology people in aged care that I come across. And also that's quite unique in industries as well.
What I really love about that is it translates to trying to find ways to simplify people's work and provide them with a better experience. And, what you've termed as making the right way the easy way as well. And I feel like that's such a good result of competition, I think. And I can definitely see how aged care is very unique, and there's a lot of things about it that I think technologists would look at as reasons why it would be very difficult or maybe unsuitable for applications of AI. Generally speaking, very unstructured work and very unstructured data, very diverse workforce, generally speaking, quite a low technological base, and has been, I think, a underserved sector in terms of technology. But I actually think that those are all reasons why it's actually perfect for AI and creates a lot of opportunity.
I described my journey in aged care as going from caveman to spaceman in a short period of time. And I truly believe that, because when I speak to people in technology, they have this from outside of aged care. They seem to think that our technology is very similar to the people we care for. It's kind of aged legacy. And I think they'd be very surprised at, the advances that we are having to make. And they say necessity is the mother of invention. Well, there is no more where that necessity is needed than aged care. And so you find that invention, you find that innovation. There's some amazing things happening in aged care. And as a technologist, it's probably the best industry to be in at the moment.
What excites you most about all of this that we're talking about? If you think about aged care in 5 to 10 years from now, what's exciting you most about that?
Everything we've talked about. I mean, everything we have talked about is not, wouldn't it be nice? It will happen. It's just when. So that's what excites me. How do I make it tomorrow and not in 2 years' time?
Yeah.
We can only go as quickly as our organization can actually consume that change. And so what we are doing is at the right pace. Yes, we could do more and we could do it quicker, but our organization isn't ready to take that at that speed. And I think that's the challenge. That's the key. How do you unlock the ability to speed up that the velocity of change? If you can do that, that's the key.
Definitely. My last question is, if you think back to Craig leaving financial services, going through SA Health, coming into aged care for the first time, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give him?
That's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. The danger is that I instantly answer that question. The considered answer,
yes, please,
is that it will be frustrating. And it will be frustrating for all of the reasons that I said just then, that it is all possible and it is all within arm's length, but the organization can't move as quickly as sometimes my ambition. And so I want to do things quickly because I want to move on to the next shiny thing, right? But if the first shiny thing is still many, many months away from arriving, it does slow down your ability. And that can be frustrating if you want to fix the world, which we all do when we come into aged care.
Mm.
So an organization like ACH Group, for purpose organization, if it had $1 left, would it spend it on technology, or would it spend it on its workforce, or would it spend it on its customers?
Mm.
And as a technologist in other industries, you'd be making a play for that dollar. I think you learn that not every dollar needs to go to technology. So you have to learn that patience and be considerate of there are other priorities in the organization and also the industry. And that's what's slowing us down. It'd be great if there was some investment, and if somehow the government could open some of those doors for us, because everything we generate, we have to generate ourselves. We have to pay for ourselves. So that will limit innovation.
Yeah. Patience is a virtue, is the lesson. Yeah.
There's your title for your podcast.
I always enjoy our conversations. I feel like I always learn something whenever we speak. So it's been, a pleasure. Thanks, Craig.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Keoki.